Britain's historic vote to break away from the EU has fired up the war of words again between our presumptive presidential nominees. Hillary Clinton lashing out today at Donald Trump's response to the referendum.
On Friday, when Britain voted to leave the European Union, he crowed from his golf course about how the disruption could end up creating higher profits for that golf course. Even though within 24 hours, Americans lost $100 billion from our 401ks. He tried to turn a global economic challenge into an infomercial.
And Trump's hitting her for taking the side that lost.
I got it right, and Hillary got it wrong, and Obama got it wrong. They sort of get everything wrong, John. They get it wrong. They get it wrong all the time. And that's part of the problem our country has.
So while we talk about how it might be affecting us, Nigel Farage, who was one of the UK leaders that led the fight to leave that referendum, he was on Neil Cavuto exclusively earlier, and here's what he had to say about that.
No, your position, and you may have your problems, is nothing like ours. We finished up until last Thursday with 70% of our laws being made by foreign institutions, with our own Supreme Court being overruled in Luxembourg, and with an open border to 500 million people. Whatever problems you've got in the USA, they are as nothing to what we've had as part of this Europe. And what we did last Thursday is we said we want our country back.
All right, Tucker Carlson, we'll get you in here. So he's saying it's not exactly a parallel, but as Americans, we always make everything about ourselves. But there are some similarities of our election. Do you agree?
I think Britain is to the U.S. what California is to New York. It's a glimpse into the future. If you want to know what this country could look like a generation from now, you look at the UK.
California.
That's been true for generations. The truth about the EU, this is a complicated thing. I mean, people who support Brexit should not pretend there's no economic cost to it. There is. And hopefully it'll be short term, but it might not be. Their economy is probably going to contract. On the other hand, in the last 40 years, Britain has become weaker internationally. It has become more dependent upon the finance sector for its economy. And it's become demonstrably and critically less English. And not just in the appearance of the people who've moved there, but in their attitudes and in their behavior. And so if you wake up one morning and your country looks nothing like the country you grew up in, you have cause for complaint. And people like Hillary wave their hand and call you a racist. That's a real thing. I'm sorry, it is. It's an ancient country and it's totally different. It's a big deal.
It's one of the things that Peter said about the EU was telling British butchers that they could no longer package pork chops the way that they used to with the kidney next to it. And it was like little things like that over time just grew to be bigger things, including the Court of Human Rights. Eric, can I ask you on the market point that Tucker just brought up?
Which I completely disagree with. I do.
The market point or the what?
No. See, what's changed? So I've been looking at this, and I'm racking my brain. I hear everyone talking about, oh, this is going to be a slowdown in the European Union and Britain, and this is going to be terrible for their economies. I'm trying to figure out what's changed. Supply and demand are pretty much going to be the same they were prior to the vote. So there's global demand. If global demand slows down, that won't be because of Brexit, in my opinion. I think this will actually help the continent. I think because England, the UK has been so strong economically. It's been one of the three feeders to the pie. Germany, France, and the UK are the big suppliers of funds into the EU, whereas a lot of countries, some of the pigs, the Portugals, Italy, Spain.
Germany.
No, I'm sorry, those people are takers. So there's the makers and the takers. Great Britain has been the big maker. I believe that this is going to be good for them and for the global economy. Everything's so globalized right now. The only argument that I could see slowing things down, and I think it's going to be very, very tiny, irrelevant. It would be cutting off their nose to spite their face on both sides would be if they did some sort of, you know how they're open borders right now? So if you're a German national, you go to England, you can work and you don't have to have a work visa. Well, if they start putting work requirements and visas on those, it may create a bureaucratic nightmare, but I don't think it's going to slow down the economy.
But a lot will depend. I hope, of course, obviously, I hope you're right as a supporter of Brexit. But don't you think much depends upon how the EU handles this? If Germany decides to punish the UK, it could be a problem.
Yeah, but what? Would they? You know, I mean, at the end of that, look, they're the continent, and they want to continue to have people doing business. London is one of the global financial centers in the world. New York, London, Tokyo, Singapore. I don't think that changes because they leave the EU.
Let's bring it back home a little bit with Hillary Clinton. We talked a little bit about how she seemed a little tone deaf on this, but she actually, until today, she hasn't actually said anything about it on the record at all over the weekend. Instead, one of the things she did was showed up as a surprise to the Gay Pride Parade here in New York City. So that was the visual of her over the weekend. She didn't get involved in the Brexit.
Yeah, so that was a good choice for her to do, especially to kind of rally her constituents, her base. She's always said that she's a big proponent, supporter of the LGBT and questioning community, except when she's accepting money from the Clinton Foundation on behalf of, countries that hang gays and lesbians. So that'd be a problem. However, bringing it back home here, she's not going to say anything about it because what's she going to do? Oh, my bad, my bad. Like, she called it wrong, right? And it also, whether the exact specifics match up in little pinpoint perfect matches isn't the point. The overarching idea is that this is a rejection of globalism, and it's more about nationalism and focusing at home and about borders and about immigration and about making your own decisions for the country that you have skin in the game for. Where I think it's going to have an impact, it's going to take a little bit to unravel it, is defense spending, because the UK was providing a large portion of that for the EU, and I think that could be slightly problematic. But when you have a big fish like London and England and everybody dropping out of this, then what happens? I mean, who's going to pick up the slack? That's what I worry about for the rest of them.
And they need strong economic growth to pay for that kind of defense.
Yeah.
Juan, before I go to you, can you take a listen to the campaign manager for Donald Trump? This is Paul Manafort explaining that this is a rejection of globalism. Take a listen.
What happened with Brexit was people taking back control. I mean, again, the faceless bureaucrats in Brussels and Strasbourg who have ruled and told the Brits how to live, and making promises to them that their lives would get better, and talking about a future based on globalism versus the family and the individual and local community. Those are the same issues that have caused the angst in America today. And this election in 2016, where Donald Trump is the only change agent, is set up perfectly on those same themes because Hillary Clinton is the epitome of the establishment. She's been in power for 25 years.
Juan, I actually applaud the way he explained that, because that's probably the best explanation I heard all weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, the thing about it is Hillary Clinton just dealt with Bernie Sanders, who's an even bigger change agent, if that's what you want to say, and clearly came back and said to the voters on the Democratic side, at least, that she can make promises and has experience in order to deliver real change as opposed to just empty promises, which is exactly her charge against Donald Trump, that he makes huge promises but has no way to deliver on them in terms of real significant change, systemic change, if you will. I would argue, by the way, with Tucker and with Eric, I mean, I look at the stock market. I see the stock market today is down 250. I see the pound is at a 31-year low. That does not help the British. It doesn't help my 401k. It doesn't help anybody to see the American and global economies contracting and reacting as they are. So you could say, oh, well, gee, this might be short term. Tucker, you said it might be short term.
I hope it will, yeah.
And I do,
it might not be.
But it might not be. And I think right now, if you listen to the economic experts, and these are people who are not in the political game, they're trying to, make money for themselves, they are tremendously concerned. They're worried about not only what's going on in Britain, they're worried about China, and they're worried about Trump here in terms of his anti-trade policies and what it could mean in terms of economic recession.
But you don't want to confuse the health of the finance economy with the health of a country. There are other factors. I think that's a real factor, by the way. Stock market, its performance matters to all of us. But it's not the only thing that matters. If you have a 1,000-year-old country with a distinct language and culture and history, and all of a sudden it erodes in 2 generations, that is a factor.
Well, it is a factor, and I think they've seen a spike in immigration, although I saw that there have been studies that indicate that there was anti-immigrant feelings, very strong ones, in Britain, even before the spike, because of just what you're talking about.
That's what Brexit was based on. Brexit was a vote on anti-immigration.
Well,
that's what
some people say it was.
Well, come on, if you're going to ascribe it to anything but anti-immigration, I think you're maybe misreading the tea leaves. You talk about global economies slowing down. Versus because 2 days on Wall Street were down. I mean, that 2 days in Wall Street is a blip. It's a couple of percentage points, and Wall Street hates surprises. They hate surprises. So going into the Brexit vote, Wall Street was up 250 points the day of the vote. These betting markets.
Why were they
the
so
betting
wrong?
markets missed this by 1,000%. They just they were listening to the vast majority of what you heard on television in Europe was that they were going to remain. It was going to be a remain. Meanwhile, some of the tabloids are saying, hey, not so fast, be careful, because what we're seeing is something completely different, a little bit more nationalism versus globalism. And so the betting markets were caught off guard. The Wall Street was caught off guard. They hate that. But while nothing has really changed economically, nothing has really changed.
Let me tell you something
last week to this
something really changed, and I thought you hit on it actually when you said, imagine the EU is going to respond now. You're seeing efforts by the English leadership to say, oh, slow down, we're not going to take steps to get out of the EU right away. We're going to do this gradually. The EU ministers are saying, no, you guys get out, take it, and we'll put in tariffs. We'll put in requirements, new requirements that make it more difficult. And guess
now,
what?
Would that be smart
the financial
to about
hold on, let me finish.
Especially
the financial
from the
industry
country who
is
adds
leaving
the most
London.
into the economic
you
pie.
Said,
why would you go after
you said
a country
financial
that means
industry was number one, right? Financial industry is number one in London in terms of what's going on the continent, right? They're all now saying, you know what, it doesn't make sense for us to be in London. We could be elsewhere. And guess what? Scotland, Scotland, Wales are saying, come to us. We're staying in the EU.
If New York decided to pull out of the United States, people would stop doing business globally, overseas, because New York wasn't part. No way.
I think
London will be a global economic financial center going forward.
I can explain the whole reason why this happened, and it's one reason.
Immigration.
Nope. Elizabeth Hurley. With the flag.
She was see that? She beat out David Beckham.
This is what happened. Yeah, that's
we don't have enough time to debate all the immigration.
I'm going to reenact it.
It wasn't just immigration, in my opinion. But guess what? The other thing that happened to England today, they just lost 2-1 to Iceland. So it might not be very happy at my house tonight.
What?
Uh-oh.
What do you think? Soccer, the only thing that matters.
Tell me you have to work
football.
late.
Ahead, some in our mainstream media have attached a label to Brits who favored breaking away. Xenophobia, which means the fear of the foreign or foreigners in this case. Bill Maher takes them on when the 5 returns.
Back now with more on the fallout from Brexit. The UK voted to leave the EU, and according to our liberal media, it's because many Brits are intolerant of foreigners.
A lot of these leave movements are led by the hard right, very, very xenophobic, anti-immigrant, very populist, nationalist, white identity politics. They are the leaders who are pushing this momentum.
It's all about building walls to try and keep the status quo and say we can improve things if we can keep the status quo and keep our, as they say, independence.
It sounds like some old-fashioned xenophobia.
There's certainly a lot of populist anxiety here, as there was in the UK. And the way that that was exercised in the UK was through a more xenophobic, anti-establishment response, right?
All right, so for once in his life, does Bill Maher have any good points?
I think he's been on this for a long time.
Yeah.
He's been the one liberal voice that said, hey, let's take a look at this radical, what's going on with radical Islam. And he got pushed back. He got a lot of heat from the left base saying that he wasn't speaking for all of them. I've said on here, my name is Eric Bolling, and I have radical Islamophobia, admittedly, but I'm not trying to get rid of it.
Juan's nodding his head yes.
Because it is that radical Islamophobia is a real thing, and it's real. Yeah. Can you imagine if California decided we're going to let anyone in through our borders? We're going to completely forget the fact that there's a law, and that you can't just come in, and they're going to say, and then you can go ahead and travel to any other state in the union. Eventually, we'd say, cut it out, California, or get out, and that's what was going on with Brexit. They were the Brits were tired of millions upon millions of refugees being taken into Germany, and then that free travel throughout the 28 countries in Europe, and ending up in some of their neighborhoods. So they pushed back on it, and I think Bill Maher is still. Right.
Most of the immigration, and there's been a spike in immigration in England, but most of it's from other countries, not from Syrian refugees.
When you vow to take 1 million Syrian refugees.
Okay, if you're saying prospectively, I appreciate it, but I'm just telling you.
Well, they're taking them now.
But they're not. I mean, the people who have filled in, the people that the British are responding to in terms of the surge of immigrants are people from other European countries, not from Syria, not from Afghanistan or Iraq.
They're coming from many places.
Okay, I hope you understand.
If you think that if Minnesota said we'll take 1 million Syrian refugees,
right?
You don't think we'd all be mad about this?
California already did that, by the way. Last year, the majority of driver's licenses issued in the state of California were issued to illegal aliens who can now drive across the country. But the point is really simple. Liberals are unwilling to defend liberal values. Not all immigrants are the same. Some come, work hard, and assimilate easily. Others come and assault the very values that make your society worth going to in the first place. The idea that women should be able to go outside without permission, not cover their faces, drive cars, that gays shouldn't be murdered for being gay. These are basic beliefs that we have that are challenged by a lot of these immigrants, and the left, one is a noble, I would say, exception to this, stand by and don't say anything because they don't want to be Islamophobic. So when it really comes down to it, when it's a contest between an assault on actual liberalism and the charge of Islamophobia, they'll side with the fascists every time. Like, that's telling.
Well, and Bill Maher pushes back on it.
And Bill Maher's another noble example.
Dana, you're our UK expert. You and
Barely.
fabulous.
I did live there for a
Elizabeth
little while. Learned to drive on the other side of the road. Not very well.
Oh my goodness.
I would say, if I could talk about the media commentary that we saw at the beginning, because the left never misses an opportunity to insult people that they don't know. And one of the things that happened in this vote, you saw people on both sides saying, let's say you were for Brexit, you might say, I didn't know anybody who was going to vote to remain. People in London who voted to remain said, I didn't know anybody who was going to vote to leave. And so the vote surprised people because of all the things that Eric mentioned in the previous block. But somebody like Christiane Amanpour, she acts as if there are no consequences to not just immigration of the last several years, but for 20 years. And one of the things that Britain has to answer for is that they are considered the soft touch when it comes to welfare benefits. Yeah. So if you are a desperate refugee coming from Northern Africa or Syria, wherever you might be coming from, it's not just that you want to leave from Poland to try to find a better job in England, you find a good job and you assimilate and everything goes fairly well. It's that you're so desperate to leave, but you find out because you know from friends or family that when you get to Britain, you'll get a council house and you'll get all sorts of other welfare benefits. You can make it all the way across another 1,000 miles to get there, even though you were so desperate as a refugee. And what I would ask all of these people, such as the smart people in the UK who wanted to remain, is what are you willing to do to solve the refugee problem at its source? The UN reported last week that there are more displaced people in the world today than ever before since they started taking records. So somebody has to answer to that. Or for that. I mean, we could argue about these immigrants coming over, but they're coming because we're not solving the problems at their source. And those problems are a lot harder to solve, and nobody wants to talk about them, but we should.
One answer might be they can't come to my country. I mean, I know, for example, there's a lot of crime taking place around the world, and in the city I live in, Washington, D.C., but they're not allowed to commit crimes in my house. And that way, you know what I mean? Like, in the end, you can only kind of solve the problems over which you have jurisdiction.
Which is one of the reasons they wanted to leave, is to say that Brussels is not going to be able to tell us what we can and can't do. Remember, in Britain, you're advised, if you're a member of the military, not to wear your uniform off base, because you might offend somebody that is from a Muslim country. That's absurd.
What does Hillary think of this? What does Hillary think?
She doesn't talk about it.
So hundreds of thousands of Muslim immigrants have moved here under the Obama administration. No one has stood up and said, you know what, you're not allowed to bring your medieval customs with you. You can bring your religion. No, I'm serious. You can bring your religion. We welcome Islam. We welcome you. But you're not allowed to keep your wives inside. You can't prevent them from driving.
Or working.
Or working. Like, that's not the American way. This is a good country because it's an open, pluralistic country. And if you don't buy into that, leave.
Well, yeah, I
Why
agree
isn't
with
Hillary
that. You know, I'm all for assimilation, by the way. But
Yes.
I must say that we've had Mormons who have different attitudes about religion and the like.
We fought a war with them over it.
But we have a pluralistic attitude towards religious practices. We don't say you can't do what we say. You cannot deny someone's individual rights if your wife wants this or that. I will say this with regard to what happened.
You have to follow the laws of this country and not the Sharia law. So you're not allowed to beat your wife, or do honor killings or any of the rest.
Well,
I
of
don't
course
like
not.
it.
That would be a crime in our country. Right. But I'm saying the thing about what's going on here is that overwhelmingly young people and the more diverse population in Britain voted to stay in the EU. It was an older white population that said, get out.
There we go.
Does that make it less legitimate?
No, but I'm just saying.
That's the implication.
We were doing so well.
We were talking earlier about tradition.
I think they're legitimate.
About tradition. No, we're talking about, you were saying keep tradition, right? People who wanted to keep the country's traditions. And I think there's a lot to that because the country is a very different place.
In 10 years, those young people might thank them.
Right. And are we allowed to have the same views here as well?
What do you mean?
To keep tradition and not, have people.
You know what?
Massive influx of refugees.
You cannot stop globalization.
Okay, but let's talk about this country. Poll numbers, anyone? Yeah, brand new. Poll numbers are in on the presidential race. Plus, some big Supreme Court decisions were handed down today. Stick around.
Donald Trump calls Hillary Clinton the most corrupt presidential candidate in U.S. history. Her camp, of course, says she's squeaky clean.
How about Clinton's ethics? How's she going to answer about that?
Well, Hillary Clinton has actually been the most transparent Secretary of State in our history. She's released all of her emails. She's released her schedules. I think the record speaks for itself.
Not her speech.
Oh boy, Clinton's been on a mission to disqualify Trump from the presidency. Newt Gingrich, however, says it's Hillary who's not qualified to be president.
She was wrong on Brexit. She wanted the Remain vote to win. She was wrong on Libya. She thought it would somehow get better if we knocked off Gaddafi. She was wrong on the reset with Russia. I mean, what has she been right about? I mean, there's no reason to believe that Hillary Clinton's experiences qualify for anything except retirement.
All right, KG. Hillary's campaign guy says she's the most transparent, well, I think he said Secretary of State. However, he went on to say she released all her emails. Really? And what about the 30,000 that she...
No, and the how many years it's going to take? 75. Yeah, 75 years. Like, I was like 76. 75 years to be able to get through all the rest of them. I mean, come on. I mean, yeah, she's wrong on all those things. So if you want to win and win big, just bet against whatever she's saying is going to happen. I mean, that's what seems to be the case. You know, wrong about, yeah, Benghazi, Libya, Syria, Russia reset, all of the above. So the problem is you have somebody that you would reward and promote, which they tend to do in that administration, with the top job as commander-in-chief, but based on what qualifications? That's not a winning season, okay? If that's in baseball, where do you get that? You get sent back down to the farm.
Yeah,
you know, like, you ain't going to play in the big leagues.
If she's so transparent, why will she just not release those transcripts of speeches? You want to be just be the most transparent person in the race. Release the speech transcripts.
I think she wasn't going to be bullied and intimidated. That's what she feels. But, you know, from my perspective, why not? Let it all out. Just get it out. I have the same feeling about Trump and his tax returns. Let him out. But, of course, the thing is that when you say anything about her lack of transparency, and I agree with you about the speeches, then everybody on the Democratic side says, oh, gee, all presidential candidates for how long have been letting out their tax returns? Donald Trump, Mr. Big Business, he won't touch it.
Dana, am I making too much out of this, or would we love to see what she actually told Wall Street when she was being paid to talk to them versus what she's saying she's going to do to them if she's president?
I think it's a good point, but I do think it's hard if you're Donald Trump. I think you're both making good points. But it's hard to demand transparency from speeches, which are not a legally binding document, when you're not willing to release your tax returns. And I think for both of them, those are going to be the big issues. The next big thing for this campaign is the conventions. Conventions actually could matter in this election because they're pretty much tied with their unfavorables. Donald Trump's a little bit higher than hers. She's not doing as well in some of the blue states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. He's not doing as well in some of the red states. And one of the things you don't want to have to do is campaign and spend resources in places where you should be able to easily win. So the map's a little bit scrambled. That's why I think the conventions will really matter.
Tucker, you want that? You want transparency, or do you want polls? What do you want?
I want transparency.
Go for it.
See, I just don't think it's a great argument against her. So the argument against her is she's corrupt. Everyone knows that. I mean,
it's a given.
It's a given. It's baked in the cake. Here's the real argument against Hillary. She has contempt for you. If you vote in a way that she doesn't like, she's happy to see some judge overturn it. She wants to completely change the composition of the country, and she wants you to change your behavior. That means she doesn't like you, America, and it's true. If we're married and I say, I love you so much, I just want you to change your appearance entirely through plastic surgery and get a new personality while you're at it. What am I saying to you? I'm saying, actually, I don't like you. I want another wife.
Well, you like
and that's
me, so
what
don't
this
like the way
president...
I look.
No, if you are committed to mass immigration that changes the composition of the country completely, and you're committed to lecturing the middle class about habits and customs they're invested in for generations, what you're saying is, I hate you. And that's true. And he should say that.
Let me do a quick round. KG, I'm not going to read that. I'm just going to go with this. The polls.
He's with America.
Yes. So there's a poll out that has Hillary Clinton up by 12 or 13 points. There's another one that has her up by 5. And they're very close in some of the swing states. Your thoughts?
Right. So, you know, obviously there's some disparity there. I think you'd have to wait for like another set. Some of that, it's before the Brexit voting and the results. That's another factor. So who knows if that's going to produce any shift, right? But obviously she's got some kind of momentum there. But, you know, okay.
Variably 2 or 3 of his worst weeks in more than a year. Donald Trump's still hanging in there on a lot of polls. Could that be seen as a good sign?
Well, you know, it's not from Republican insiders don't say that to me. I mean, what they say is that he's missed an opportunity to really take off, that he wasted a couple of weeks here. I would say this about the polls, that there's some people, I think, on the blogs who are saying, well, but they're counting more Democrats. It's overweighted for Democrats. And in fact, it's not. I mean, but even if you did that, it's still that she's up on average in all the polls about 5 points.
Fox
I will say this, though.
No,
that
Fox
it's
says
key.
we don't. That's not true.
Fox said what?
We don't over.
Fox
we
says
don't over.
don't.
No, we don't. No, I said that in all the polls, including Fox, she's up.
Yeah.
She's
Right.
up. No, but what I was going to say to you was that what's really telling to me is that the fall off is not so much overweight in Democrats, it's that there are Republicans who are buying off of Donald Trump. That's the phenomenon that I see in the polling.
Quick thoughts on the polls, Dana?
I think that the commentary on the polls from the weekend that would, if you said, well, those are not good for Trump, it sort of assumes that she will not do anything to implode over the next 18 weeks. And 18 weeks is a really long time to go. So what we're looking at now is a snapshot in time. It's hard to predict out. And I think that the polls after the 4th of July are really important. And then, as I said, the next big issue or event will be the conventions. And
then
he
the
only
debates.
has about 77% support of Republicans now. The last several elections, Republicans have been able to get 90% of that vote. So he's got some work to do there.
His work is in the non-white vote. He's getting crushed in now. How does he turn that around?
He's got to turn everything around. If the election were held today, he'd lose to Hillary Clinton. She'd be the president of the United States. And this country would be totally different forever if that were to happen. This is not a joke. They're not taking it seriously enough. He's not self-disciplined enough. Obviously, if you watch him, you know that's true. This is an emergency. If he can pull it out, he can win.
Yeah.
But now is the time to get really stop with this nonsense whining about the polls. Who cares? You need to get a message out. It's a real message. It's a winning message. And start talking about it.
You know what I care about? 3 Supreme Court justices to be appointed in the next term, probably.
Maybe
At
more.
least 2, maybe a third one. Supreme Court, by the way, ruled today on the biggest abortion case in nearly a quarter of a century. The outcome next.
2 big Supreme Court rulings today. We'll begin with a huge victory for the abortion rights movement. In a 5-3 vote, the Supreme Court struck down parts of a Texas law that would have led to the closure of many abortion clinics and potentially set a precedent nationwide. Justices ruled the state cannot put an undue burden on the right of the woman to terminate her pregnancy. Hillary Clinton celebrated the decision. She called it a victory for women across America and a reminder of how much is at stake in this election. KG, so what we know is that under the Texas law, you went from about 42 clinics in the state down to 19 because what they required was that the doctors performing the abortions have privileges at a nearby hospital and that the buildings be constructed by clinic, medical clinic standards. It couldn't just be a standalone building. What do you think?
Well, the idea behind it, the people are saying that we need to make sure these rules are enforced, that they wanted to make sure that women's health and reproductive rights were being adequately protected by having licensed facilities that had doctors that had admitting privileges. Should there be a problem in one of these outpatient care facilities if someone needed to then receive medical care? So it sounds like a good idea. The proponents, that were against it, that say we're suing, this violates the rights of women, et cetera, and is going to drastically create what's called an undue burden, which is the constitutional standard. We're putting forth those exact statistics that you said, which in fact came under question in terms of the accuracy of the numbers. Ultimately, it's interesting because it went down 5-3 and they vacated that stay from the Texas Fifth Circuit. But what I found interesting is, Dana, remember I covered that Gosnell trial, and the dissent said, oh, well, what about this? What about, women who, babies that were killed and women who became sick at Dr. Gosnell because that wasn't an adequate facility that didn't have, meet the guidelines. They disavowed that specifically in the dissent and said, no, in fact, existing Texas law does have these requirements and does provide, and what you were suggesting is an undue burden, and that is the standard. So there you go.
So, Dana, you surprised it was 5-3? Obviously, some conservative justices decided.
Well, I think that the issue, Kimberly explains it so well. So it was a relatively narrow proposal, I think, in Texas, although, as Kimberly said, that they were able to convince the justices that it was an undue burden. I think this comes at a time, as Eric was pointing out, the Supreme Court hangs in the balance in this next election. And interestingly to me, there are more pro-life voters today than there ever have been before. And partly of that is because of faith or science, or people voting their conscience. And if you are a pro-life voter, it's very hard to ever pull the lever for somebody that you don't think is truly pro-life. And so that hangs in the balance as well.
All right. So the other case that was decided today was former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. And here the Supreme Court sided with the governor who had been convicted on bribery charges. And they said that they thought the government just went overboard in interpreting what constitutes a bribe. Tucker?
Can I say one thing about the abortion case?
Of course.
Whatever you think about the subject, and we've had the debate over Roe v. Wade for 43 years now, Hillary Clinton's response is really revealing. It's a victory for women. Since when is abortion ever a victory for any woman?
Wow.
It's the saddest, cruelest, most tragic thing. We can debate whether it ought to be legal, but the real debate is it a good thing? And she thinks it is. It's the non-negotiable in her positions. It's the one thing she's never wavered on.
You know that it's more than
means.
Hillary Clinton. I mean,
it's way more than Hillary Clinton.
Clearly, you have a women's rights movement who, and I'm surprised, but it's now, even in the language of the court today, the right to an abortion is treated as a right, a privacy right.
But it's more than that. It's the enthusiasm about it, the jumping up and down. I'm for abortion. Really? Do you know any normal person who could get excited about abortion?
Hard.
I find it so stomach-turning and revealing.
Look, I happen to have a similar sense, but I do think that if it's a matter of, red team, blue team over, are you pro-life or
I get it, but are there some things, it's like, that's just too much. You know what I mean?
They should, You're looking for ways to save babies' lives and have women have babies versus terminating.
The most relevant part of the McDonald case was unanimous decision. So clearly, the Supreme Court felt that the lower court overstepped their bounds. That's fine. Well,
I was going to say that the liberals overstepped their bounds in Virginia when they went after McDonald.
Right. Can I just point out that do you realize that a couple of days ago the Supreme Court came down 4-4 on President Obama's executive order to allow 4 to 5 million illegals to stay in the country? It was a 4-4 tie, which sent it back to the lower court, which said no, he overstepped his bounds. This is why the next election is so important. It doesn't matter if you hate Donald Trump. If you're not liberal, you don't want Hillary Clinton. It can be anybody in the Republican seat that has, and by the way, Donald put out 11 people that he would put on the court, the list he would choose from, that would be far, far better choices than anyone that Hillary Clinton would put on the court.
It's also incredibly important to keep the Senate.
But remember this, immigration and guns will hit the Supreme Court in the next 4 years. Think about that before you vote.
Imagine how Democrats feel about the blocking of Merrick Garland at this point.
Gentrifying our genius, whatever that means. Well, Justin Timberlake was watching this at home, and he was inspired by it. So he sent out a tweet saying, I'm inspired, but that compliment did not sit well with some on social media. One person fired back on Twitter saying, quote, so does this mean you're going to stop appropriating our music and culture and apologize to Janet too? That would be Janet Jackson, of course. Timberlake later apologized cringingly to anyone who felt he was out of turn by doing that. I'm a little confused, Juan, by this whole cultural appropriation thing. So if someone who looks like you did something impressive, no one who doesn't look like that person can benefit from it. So, for example, a Scottish physician discovered penicillin. Only Scots get antibiotics? Like, what does this mean?
Well, no. I mean, there's a history in this country. I mean, the most famous example would be Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley comes out of the South, and basically he's doing black music, but it's acceptable, the hips and the dancing and everything.
Right.
It's acceptable to white audience, and he becomes a huge star, whereas a black artist would have not been accepted in the same way. I last heard this argument actually remember Paul Simon, when he came back from South Africa, and he had that Graceland, fabulous album, and there were students at Howard who said, you are appropriating South African black music and bringing it to the United States. Actually, I think it was a gift. I thought it was exposure. It brought that music to our attention in a way no one had done it
before. I felt exactly it was a great album. So Dana, should Justin Timberlake have said, hey, buzz off? I was trying to be nice.
I think that Justin Timberlake had the right answer at the end, which is he said, I never should have tweeted about it in the first place, which is probably usually the best answer for everyone. Twitter seems to just get people in situations that they end up having to apologize. But I'm confused about this. So globalism is bad, except for when it's good.
I totally
Can you help me figure that out? Just let me know when globalism is okay.
This is so ridiculous. I'm beginning to see why you went off Twitter, right?
Yeah,
I mean, because no good deed goes unpunished, right? I mean, look at this. He was just trying to be nice and say, okay, great speech, which, by the way, I did not know that actor, he's on Grey's Anatomy, and I didn't know he was so angry. He seems so upset.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like, there's things that go wrong, but also focus on the positive.
So you're watching BET Awards last night. What did you
I was watching the Olympic trials, the U.S. championships, I guess that's what it was. The people were qualifying for the Olympics. But I saw this morning. Justin Timberlake, you're right, is extremely talented. But he's an idiot to agree with that commentary by Jesse Williams.
Right.
Jesse Williams, and where did that come from?
That's what I'm saying.
The reason why rappers are living in, driving Mercedes-Benzes and living in neighborhoods is because they're selling their music, not just to the black community, but to the white community. Every suburban white kid thinks he's the next rap star. He thinks he's the next Jay-Z, rapping all over the place. So
much to my consternation.
You should be happy that the white
Jay-Z or it's
people are
Eminem or
buying
Vanilla Ice.
the African American or hip hop music because of their finances.
I feel like we're very close to solving this, but unfortunately, I'm just being told we're out of time.
Yes.
One more thing is up next. Stay tuned.
It's time now for one more thing. I'm going to go first because, in case you missed it, in West Virginia, they've been dealing with horrific floods and historic flooding. And the rain is coming again. There are 23 people have already died in this situation. And Brad Paisley had a great tweet. He's a country music star. He said, "Hey, media, in all the hoopla about this EU Britain stuff, don't forget about West Virginia. Show people what's happening there." And you can help by going online and research information about who to help. I talked to Chris Starwalt, our resident political analyst who is from West Virginia, and he said that unionmission.com could be a good place to check out. So we wish everybody there well, and we're thinking about you.
Yeah,
Kimberly.
Especially the families. Well, quick programming note, I'll be doing a Facebook Live tonight at 6:15 Eastern, so please join me on my Facebook page, and the first 25 people that share the stream get a free autographed book, and I'll also be on with my friend Greta at 7. And now I want to tell you about an incredible reporter who was honored over the weekend. It's been almost a year since the tragic murders of WDBJ-7 journalists Allison Parker and Adam Ward. Their lives cut short when a gunman opened fire during a live television broadcast. And on Saturday, Allison was awarded the Emmy for Outstanding Reporter at the 58th National Capital Chesapeake Bay Emmy Awards in Baltimore. Her family, along with her boyfriend and fellow journalist Chris Hurst, accepted the award on Allison's behalf. They will be missed, not forgotten. Hearts and prayers to their families.
Absolutely.
Eric.
Okay, so finally, this has been a long process, but Wake Up America comes out tomorrow. But the book is already a national #1 bestseller on Amazon. National #1 bestseller in nationalism, #8 in politics. But check this out. What's on the back of this? See this? See this? It's Bill O'Reilly. I'll be on Bill O'Reilly tonight to talk about the book, and he grills me. He asked me 3 tough questions of the book, and he read the book. So look for that tonight, 8 o'clock tonight.
All right, congratulations on that. And Juan.
Well, archaeologists in Mexico made a big find. In a village outside of Mexico City, they found the bones of a 14,000-year-old mammoth. And it's funny, they found this when the workers were installing drains. Anyway, the skeleton was almost completely intact, massive tusks still attached. And while everybody thinks it's exciting, what they're really interested in is the fact that the bones were scattered, meaning that human beings at some point cut up this animal for its meat and its skin, which is, I mean, unbelievable. Anyway, scientists are hoping now to reassemble the fossils for display.
Very good.
Wait,
Yum.
Wait, that we ate meat?
Well, mammoth? Why would,
Tucker, you're next.
Does it taste
Go.
like chicken?
That's a big meal. All right. So
can
Paul
feed a lot of
LePage is the
people.
governor of Maine, which is the greatest state in the union. He's long been my favorite governor. Turns out his wife is even cooler. Her name is Ann LePage. She just took a job. She's the first lady of Maine, waiting tables at a restaurant in Boothbay Harbor. Why is she doing this? Not for publicity, because she needs the dough. Her husband is the lowest paid governor in the nation, $70,000 a year, and she wants to buy a new car. Predictably, entitled, smug liberals are mocking her, but she's cool and an example to the rest of us.
Oh,
Yes, of
I'm
course
very
they are.
proud of her. All right, set your DVR so you never miss
for her.
an episode of The Five. That's it for us. Special Report is next.